Two, one. Hey guys, thank you very much for tuning in. So I have a show for you tonight that is kind of a departure on what I normally do. Normally we are discussing things from the perspective on the right and talking, about issues from pretty much one point of view, and that is that's critical, but equally critical is opening up conversation between people that we don't think we have things in common with. Maybe we have some things, maybe we don't. But I'm going to be speaking with the leader of North Carolina Forward Party, and I'm going to let him explain what his organization is about, what they're trying to do. But let me first put this tweet up here. So this statement caught my eye during the time where it came to light that the North Carolina Democrat Party leadership had kind of cast aside a newly formed North Carolina Jewish caucus. So here's the tweet. If the Democrat Party caves to it, that's the end of the Democrat Party. Actually, that's what the Democrats said. And you'll see North Carolina Forward Party said that they strongly rejected the anti-Semitism in the North Carolina Democrat Party and urged this to all come to an end. And so I that was remarkable to me. I like it when people call out on both sides bigotry. Bigotry has no place in politics, has no place in school. We've been talking about that for years now. And so I really appreciated that statement. So I want to introduce to you right now Patrick Newton with the North Carolina Forward Party. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Oh, my pleasure, Sloan. So glad to be here.
So what is your background before you came to the North Carolina Forward Party?
Oh, goodness. Well, first of all, a quick correction. You said as the leader of the North Carolina Forward Party, MJ Hall is our chair, and she's a remarkable young woman, and hopefully we'll have her on your show one of these days. I'm actually the vice chair, but I'm part of the leadership group. We have an executive committee that's been elected, and we've been part of the party for about a year now. The Forward Party nationally was formed last summer in 2022, and what got me involved was it was started by Andrew Yang and Christy Todd Whitman. And for anybody who doesn't know who those two are, it's kind of a big Democrat and a big Republican. And that really caught my ear that these two are going to start a new party. That gave me hope that maybe there's a chance that we could have a solution somewhere in the middle. The two parties now are just so polarizing and pulling all of us as far left and as far right as possible. The idea of a party that's more of a centrist movement, the moderate middle, if you will, it's a large number of people, but they're disenfranchised and they're not represented in the current system.
So you guys have run a few candidates across the country. Tell me about a few of them.
Yeah, so we, again, just kind of got started, but this November in 2023 in North Carolina, we had 4 different forward aligned candidates is what we would call them. So they sign our candidate pledge, which you can go to our website, northcarolinaforwardparty.com. There's all kinds of information there, including the pledge we ask our candidates to sign. And unfortunately, none of them won, but we did have some really good races. Barbara Gaskins ran for mayor down in Greenville, North Carolina. Victoria Masica ran for Hillsborough Town Commissioner. Rob Yates ran for mayor of Charlotte. And we also had J.J. Campbell ran for office in Durham. So, but nationally, we had 6 different elected officials win elections this year. One was, I believe, actually Attorney General, one of the states. So we really had some good progress. And for 2024, again, just to kind of clarify for your listeners, so we are a political party, but it's funny, I tell people, I think we're the biggest, nonpartisan party, if you will. We really don't get into the traditional partisan politics. We're more about electoral reform, about fixing the system, and getting better solutions to the voters.
So you guys ran candidates in the most recalcitrant far left enclaves in the entire state. And that's kind of interesting because, in Durham in particular, it's either left, far left, or communist. That's my comment. You don't have to agree with it, but and so Pitt County is getting to be that way. Charlotte is that way, and so it's kind of ingenious, right? Because you're running in places where it's just very hostile to the Republican Party, and where people have, a lot of Democrats are very frustrated that the far left progressives have taken over the party. And we do see that in this anti Jewish, downright anti Israel, in a lot of cases, I think, anti American sort of bent that a lot of the, I would say old school Democrats or maybe Reagan Republicans early on, right? They're not down with that.
Well, it's interesting. So, Josh Peters is our director of communications and does some great work. And I asked him to text me this today. This is the most updated numbers for party affiliation in North Carolina. Right now, it's a little over 2.6 million unaffiliated, about 2.4 million Democrats, and about 2.2 million Republicans. So as you can see, and then obviously Libertarians, No Labels, and Green Party have some members as well. But as you can see, there's more people in North Carolina that have decided to not be affiliated with either of these two parties than to pick one or the other. And I think that really tells you something. They feel like neither one of these parties represent them, and they don't really have a home. So that's the lane that we're trying to fill. And I think one of the challenges that we're facing is this whole issue of being a registered voter in North Carolina. And you and I talked about this the other day about open primaries, and we can get into that a little bit more. But being unaffiliated actually gives you more rights than being
Yeah,
associated with one of the two
yeah,
major parties, because you can go into a primary and say, in this election, I'd like to participate in the Republican primary or the Democratic
yeah.
primary, whichever you prefer. So groups of people, there's a movement, Blackout 2024, and Barbara Gaskins, who I mentioned, she's a candidate. She's also a member of our executive committee, and she's really spearheading this effort. The Black community in North Carolina traditionally tends to vote for Democrats. Um, and I would challenge them to take a look at it. Are the Democrats really serving their interests as a community? And if they become unaffiliated, at least that sends a message to both parties. You can't just count on our votes. I mean, when you look at the primary coming up in March, which is going to be very important, we'll see what the turnout is, but it's not going to be much. Turnout vote, people don't go out to primaries. And I would challenge, your listeners and your viewers to get involved in the primaries. That's where so many decisions are made in our elections.
Yeah.
So, you talked about some of the pockets earlier. There's districts where one of either of the two parties won't even run a candidate
Yeah.
because the election is decided in the primary.
Yep.
That's what gerrymandering is all about, right? You stack all these districts, so some of them are going to be red and some are going to be blue. You just control how many and where. But think of how many disenfranchised voters that creates. And again, I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat. If you live in a district that's been already decided to be for the other side, your vote really doesn't matter at all. And that's what we got to fix.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the unregistered, or excuse me, unaffiliated voters. I mean, there's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, frustration is one, and we can see that readily. But another reason is a lot of folks know that that is public information, and they don't want to be associated with, let's just say, the Republican Party, given all of the absolute, canceling and animus there is towards Republicans. But maybe there's that towards the Democrats as well. I mean, things are getting, downright hostile. And what I think I hear you saying is your party and some of your platform takes the heat at a lot of these issues, such as education and some of the cultural issues that these two parties are battling over.
Correct. And that's really where we're trying to shift the conversation to. So, uh, for example, in terms of electoral reform, I don't know if many of your listeners have heard of ranked choice voting. Instant runoffs is another term that's used, and it's happening. It's the state of Maine uses it all throughout elections, top to bottom, but it's used locally across the country. And it's a program where you vote kind of in order. So instead of just saying, this is who I want, you can say, well, this would be my first choice. But if they don't win, here's who I'd like to see second. Here's who I'd like to see third. And then there's a mathematical process that determines a winner. So you don't end up in a situation where the majority of people don't want this person to be in office, but they win anyway
Hmm.
because of the general election. So it's really a creative way. There's a lot of benefits to it, and it takes out some of this animosity because I still want to be considered as people's second choice, right? If you and I are running against each other and there's 5 or 6 of us, well, maybe you're their first choice, but I want them to put me as number 2 because they still think that I'm reasonable and we can have a discourse like we're having. If I just start screaming and yelling at you, I'm going to drop to the bottom for a lot of people. So it creates a much better environment for the election process.
You just made yourself a declared enemy of the Republican and the Democrat Party leaders, right? Because that takes away all the funding and all the power, and so you're probably not going to be invited to the Christmas parties. And I don't want to break that to you. I don't want
No,
to break
I know. We'll see how it goes. With any luck, we'll be inviting them to ours soon. So
Okay, all right. Well, I like that spirit. I mean, look, I'm a reformer and I'm a pioneer, and that's one of the things that you and I have in common. You don't just sit there and complain about things. You go out and you actively try to exert force, positive or negatively, on a system to try to change the trajectory, and that I like. And again, I do like that we have some common values of civility and decency that we're trying to enact and inspire. And I think that that's an important thing. And so I want to tell everybody this. While we were in the green room, Patrick said, "Hey, I don't want to put you on the spot and ambush you, but I want to bring up a topic." I'm like, "You go for it. You can do it." So I'm going to let you do that because I think I'm going to surprise some people perhaps with my answer.
yeah, no, this will be fun. So I'm not honestly, personally, or as a party, we're not really in the culture wars. We don't really engage. But what was, I think what drew us together was when we saw what was going on with the idea of a Jewish caucus. Again, well, and you mentioned something. You mentioned grace and tolerance, which are in our candidate pledge. When we ask a candidate to become forward aligned, one of the things that's a bullet item on that pledge that people can look on the website is to execute grace and tolerance in this process. So that's obviously a challenge with the culture wars. But so back to the question though that I mentioned in the green room. There's a case in Florida, and I tried to do some good research because that's something we talked about earlier too, right? Is education on a lot of this stuff. A lot of these things that people are arguing about, well, it's because I heard about it from somebody, or I saw one article or headline. But did you really have a chance to dive into it and get the information?
Or if they want it, I automatically don't. Just like I was a teenager. Like if you told me not to wear red lipstick, I'm wearing the red lipstick.
Exactly. Yeah, no, so that's even more to the point, right? If the Republicans hear that the Democrats had this idea, that's really all they need to hear. They don't need to know what the idea is, what it was about, what the topic was. It's coming from the other side, not interested. So I tried to avoid that. I did some research, and it was parents in Florida who tried to have the principal of the school removed, and their language was children were exposed to, I believe they even said pornography, but it was actually the statue of David of Michelangelo, and exposes his nude body, obviously, as David. So the research I did too, because one of my questions when I was talking about this with a friend of mine was, I want to be fair here. So are we talking kindergartners? Are we, because they're all going to be giggling and not know what it is, and I could get that. So when I read the article, though, it was 6th grade and above, so it's middle schoolers. So I'll pause there though, because that was really my question, right? I know you're an advocate for a lot of these issues, and K through 12 education is your thing. So how did you feel about that case? Or maybe you have more information than I do, and if you could please share it with me.
I'd be happy to. I haven't read about the actual case, so I'll just start out in saying that from the onset. And so if it's portrayed as what you're talking about, I mean, context is everything. Although it's hard to imagine a piece of art being portrayed in a pornographic context, but I'm telling you, with some teachers, Patrick, sadly, these days you never know. So if it's a big stink about studying, art, for instance, or I mean, heck, it might even be in a class on making statues. I think this is absurd. right? And if it's in a public school, obviously, I think it's absurd. And I think it does great harm to the movement of actually removing pornographic books out of schools. Look, there are some books, several of them, and the list of them are growing, that are offered in school libraries, that are, and it's almost like it's deliberate, that if they weren't drawn, in other words, if they weren't art, they would absolutely be pornographic and people would be arrested. That's point blank. That's why they're drawn. That's why they're drawn as comics, right? Because they can pass it off as art. And there's a lot of protective laws that make that possible. And there are sadly, activists that use our own laws against us, and they're doing these things. And a lot of them get their jollies on provoking parents who don't have the means or the opportunity to take their children out of public schools. And I think that equally, that does a great disservice to the Democrat Party, for instance, which seems to be all in on this stuff. But again, without knowing the facts, I think that teaching art is fine. And if it was sixth grade, I know I'd be giggling, maybe even a little uncomfortable. And that's fine. But another thing too, Patrick, and I want to get your take on this. Our position is the parents' right to be notified. For instance, we've been many instances where we've heard of fifth and sixth graders having to read aloud things about, I'm just going to say it, blowjobs and anal sex, and taking turns in reading in class. And that's not even parental rights. That shouldn't be done point blank. But I guess at the very minimum, at my most liberal sense, I would say, don't you think you should tell parents first? And if they want to opt in, that's fine. I guarantee you there'd be nobody in the class the next day. But, right, I mean, that's our position, is that parents should know. And this is common sense. 15 minutes ago, Patrick, we knew kids shouldn't be exposed to this, especially if these people, are doing it without their children. These aren't the teacher's children.
Right. No, so obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, but
it should be. Right.
That sounds insane to me, right? That would actually be happening. And this is, no disrespect, but like, how do I know that? Right. Like, well, a parent said, or, I mean, is there, and I, in fairness, I haven't website and drilled down. I mean, but even the list of books, I hear about this list. I'll be honest. Both my kids went through public school. We live in Wakefield in North Carolina, in Raleigh. Very pleased with the experience. Some teachers were better than others, but some were fantastic. I mean, some of the things that these teachers did for my children, I'll never be able to think. As far as the material they were exposed to, I like to think my wife and I were closely engaged with our kids' education. I can honestly say I never came across anything that I found disturbing, inappropriate, asking them to read material like you just said. And I like to think I know my children well enough. If they were asked to do something like that, or something that happened in our school, that we would have heard about it. But again, so on its surface, everything you said sounds insane and absurd to me. And I guess I would say to you and your movement, because that's what it is, do everything you can to make those types of examples as public and transparent as possible. Because when I read articles that say, we heard from a parent that said, but then I check out, because I'm like,
I'm with you. Evidence is king, and we provide primary evidence, period. And if we don't have it, we don't run with a story. Right. Rumor and hearsay does great damage to the person being accused, like teachers. Look, most teachers, in fact, nearly all teachers would never do something like this. And in fact, when you ask, poll after poll, when you ask parents, are you happy with your school and your teachers? The answer is yes. But they'll also say, do you think there's a problem with K-12 education and radicalism? Yes. So in other words, while most parents are happy with their school, they see it, and there are examples. Those examples are worth spotlighting. It is a new phenomenon. We didn't have this 10 years ago. This seems to be a new thing where we see activism, um, in schools, and I think a lot of Democrats would disagree with this, but just as a lot of Republicans are afraid to register because they don't want to be, chastised. I think there's a lot of Democrats that don't want to be chastised by standing up and rejecting some of this nonsense and other things.
No, and that's been our argument all along. When you look at those numbers that I read earlier, I'm curious of the 2 point whatever million Democrats and Republicans respectively, how many of those, or frankly haven't even thought about it, right? They've just been a registered whatever for the last 10 years and they haven't bothered to make the effort. So I would challenge them to go online. It takes about 5 minutes and become an unaffiliated voter. Because if you're in that extreme pocket where, I'm in 100% with the Democrats or the Republicans and you're registered that, then good for you and fight your fight and do whatever you got to do. But the large majority of us are not in either one of their, camps that committedly. We need to at least identify that as registered voters and say, you know what, I'm unaffiliated and I'm open to making decisions that can help all of us, regardless if they come from the left or the right or whatever the case might be.
Right.
Um,
Well, there's a
I
need
want
for, I'm a Republican. I love the party. I work from within the party. That being said, I criticize Republicans probably more than the Democrats.
so
You,
why are you still a Republican?
yeah. And see, now you're putting me on the spot. Um, I will answer that because I believe that the platform of the Republican Party, when followed, provides the greatest pathway to prosperity and security and happiness and achievement of the American dream than the other platform. That's what I believe. And when followed, right?
Right. Well, those are two very, very powerful words. So I would challenge you to consider become an unaffiliated voter. And then when you find a Republican that you feel is going to follow the platform and you want to support him, you always have the right to vote for him. But being an unaffiliated voter will at least give you the freedom that if there is a situation where you think a Democrat might have a solution that you want to be a part of, you'd have the right to at least vote for him. And you'd be telling the Republican Party, you can't just count on my vote every single time when you look at these charts and graphs and determine where you're going to draw these special lines. You know what? You can't just count on me. You got to prove to me that you're going to do your job and you got to earn my vote.
A lot of people have made that case, and I was a Democrat for a long time. Not only a Democrat activist. When I do something, I'm all in. But for me, and I'm in leadership, and I like being a delegate, and I like having a say about some of the party rules and things like that. And again, but I will say, Patrick, I've heard a lot of folks on my side who get frustrated, who make exactly